The middleweight Supersport category is going through some major changes. We still have one true classic here, the Honda CBR600RR, but it now faces some serious competition from the KTM 990R CR and the Yamaha R9. We brought all three together here at the Pannonia Ring. So welcome to 1000 PS TV from the Pannonia Ring. And of course, I have Martin Bauer with me. In front of us are three exciting Supersport bikes, all sitting roughly around the 120 horsepower mark. We tested them here on this beautiful circuit. To make the comparison as fair as possible, we decided to use the same tire on all three bikes. The Continental SportAttack 5. Martin, you have already spent quite a lot of time on this tire. Why did we choose this one in particular, and what makes it such a good fit for this track?
The tire is fundamentally designed for road use, but with a strong focus on track riding as well. Continental rates it at around 80% road and 20% track. For us, that makes it a very useful tire for comparing and testing motorcycles because we can ride off straight away even when the tire is cold. We do not need tire warmers, which becomes a bit of a logistical problem when you have several motorcycles to test at the same time. And the tire performs very well across a wide range of conditions. Today, for example, we have had extremely high temperatures, and even then it worked very well. That gives us a really solid basis for comparing the bikes. And as you said, these motorcycles operate in a very similar performance class. So putting all of them on the same tire is definitely important. With the Continental SportAttack 5, that works extremely well.
Exactly. And as you said, it is seriously hot today, so forgive me if I keep rubbing my eyes. The sweat is running straight into them, which is not exactly pleasant. If you want to know more about this tire, Martin also tested it on the KTM 1390 Super Duke R. In other words, basically the torque monster of all torque monsters. You can also find out how the tire performed there in another video on 1000 PS TV. But now let us get to the main topic, middleweight Supersport bikes. Martin, I would say we work our way through the three motorcycles one by one. Let us start with the classic, the CBR600RR. It was reintroduced in 2024, if I remember correctly, still based on the traditional formula, a pure Inline-Four. But now it also comes with a proper electronics package. Apart from that, the basic concept is still very familiar. The frame, the swing arm, a lot of the core architecture comes from the previous generation. PC40 is the key word here. I used to have one of those in my garage myself, so there are plenty of familiar details here. The question is, Martin, if so much of it is familiar, is the recipe still good today, or is it starting to feel a little dated?
Old does not automatically mean bad, does it? And I actually like the fact that we have something of an old school bike here with us. Not really an old bike, of course, but an old concept in a new package. It is still very slim and compact, just as people remember it, which is a bit of a contrast to your figure, so it works quite well that you are standing next to it. But seriously, anyone who knows the old CBR will immediately feel at home on this bike. Honda did not only carry over the engine concept, but also quite a lot of the ergonomics with all the advantages and disadvantages that come with that. The CBR600RR is actually relatively comfortable in terms of upper body position, but the foot pegs are positioned a bit too far forward for really sporty riding. That creates a slightly unusual seating position, and your knees end up quite close to your elbows. Personally, I would prefer a slightly different ergonomic setup. The clip-ons are also swept back quite aggressively and turned quite far inward. That gives you a relatively narrow grip on the bars. Compared with the other two bikes, you simply do not get as much leverage through the handlebars. And that means the basic feel of the motorcycle is completely different from the other two competitors. Another important point is that this is the only bike here with just 600 cubic centimeters. So it already starts with a significant displacement disadvantage compared with the other two, and you can definitely feel that. Especially when you try to accelerate hard from lower revs, there is simply not much happening. This engine needs revs. You really want at least around 10,000 revolutions per minute before it starts working properly. Once you are there, you still have a very broad and usable rev range, but first you need to get into that window and stay there. And even for me, as a slightly more experienced rider, it is not always easy to keep the engine right in that sweet spot all the time. You sometimes need to start thinking about gearing as well to make everything work properly. But apart from that, if you enjoy racetrack riding and you love screaming high-revving inline-fours, then this bike will put a smile on your face purely because of the sound and the way it delivers the whole experience.
Absolutely. And with the engine, as you said, you really notice that it needs revs. For the sake of completeness, I should also mention that there was a recall on this model at the beginning of 2026 because of potentially increased oil consumption. Honda took care of that though, and the issue is now under control. The engine itself is proven and it works very well on the racetrack. Looking at the electronics, I was actually a little surprised. We are in 2026 where everything seems to have huge displays. On the Honda, not only is the screen quite small, but the whole setup feels a bit more old school. The controls are also not quite as intuitive as on the KTM, which we will talk about in a moment. But in terms of adjustment options, Martin, has Honda managed to bring the electronics properly into 2026? Or is it still behind the competition?
Honda has kept it relatively simple. It is a more basic solution, but that does not automatically make it worse. The individual settings are easy to access and there are still plenty of options. We have power modes, traction control, wheelie control, and so on. You can switch these things separately without having to dig through endless submenus. I am a big fan of that because it keeps everything clear and straightforward. Anyone who has ridden on a racetrack knows that you already have enough other things to think about. If you then have to waste time jumping through complicated menus, it quickly becomes frustrating and annoying. So I really like the simplicity here. The electronic systems themselves also work very well. You can feel that they are there, but they do not restrict the bike too aggressively. You can still convert a large amount of the available power into actual acceleration. So yes, the electronics are implemented in a fairly simple way, but they are effective and functional.
Effective and functional is actually a good way to move on to the suspension of the CBR600RR. We have fully adjustable Showa suspension, but quite a few of us have ridden the bike today, and the general impression was always the same. It feels relatively soft and comfortable. Do you think that can be changed significantly through the suspension settings? Or is the Honda simply designed with a softer, basic setup?
The internal setup is definitely on the softer side from the beginning. We do have full adjustment available, but the adjusters themselves have a relatively limited range of effect. So you cannot completely transform the character of the suspension just by turning the adjusters. If you wanted a fundamentally different setup, you would have to make internal changes. But we should not forget that the CBR600RR has also been designed with everyday road use in mind. That is why Honda has chosen a slightly softer setup from the factory. Having said that, the engine delivers its power very smoothly and progressively thanks to that high-revving inline-four. So in practice, the softer suspension does not create a major problem. At least for me, it never felt so soft or vague that I could no longer feel where the limit was. You can feel that the bike moves around a little, but because the engine is not especially aggressive and the overall power level is not extreme, it never really became a problem on the racetrack.
Well, I am nowhere near the limit you are riding at, Martin. But for me, as a hobby track day rider who maybe spends a few days a year on a circuit, the setup worked very well, the bike remains approachable, and the engine character is very pleasant. I also think it is a motorcycle that will never suddenly shock or surprise you. It simply does everything in a very predictable way, just as you said. And another very reasonable point is the price. Here in Austria, it costs around 13,800 euros, which makes it clearly the cheapest motorcycle in this comparison. Martin, unless you have anything else to add about the Honda, I would say we move on to the next more expensive bike, the Yamaha R9. The Yamaha R9 had a slightly difficult start. Yamaha unfortunately could not deliver bikes immediately at the beginning of the season. But now it is finally here. Expectations were high, and there has also been a lot of enthusiasm from the public. Our Track Day Tune-Up project has attracted plenty of attention, and there has been a lot of interest in the bike here as well. The R9 really brings the Supersport category into the modern era. It uses the familiar 3-cylinder engine from the MT-09, and the Supersport racing regulations were adjusted so that this type of motorcycle could compete. In many ways, it is the spiritual successor to the R6. And we all know the R6, that was a very serious track day motorcycle. So, Martin, can the R9 live up to that legacy? Is it a worthy successor?
You have to say that the concepts are quite different. And I do not only mean the engine. The overall ergonomics are also very different. The R6 was a completely uncompromising supersport bike with a riding position designed almost entirely around maximum sportiness. With the R9, Yamaha has clearly gone in a different direction. They realized that 600 cubic centimeters supersport bikes were no longer as popular on the road as they used to be. So they wanted to broaden the concept a little. The R9 is Yamaha's first real step in that direction. The riding position is much more accessible. You sit more upright, the handlebars are wider, the front fairing is more effective, and you get better wind protection. And thanks to the 3-cylinder engine, which already delivers strong performance from low revs, something that is extremely important for road use, we now have a motorcycle with a completely different character from the old R6, but as we have seen today, it still works extremely well on the racetrack.
Exactly, and as you said, everyday usability is now part of the package as well. We even have cruise control here. On a Supersport bike, that would have been almost unthinkable a few years ago, so the modern era has definitely arrived. From my amateur perspective, looking at the suspension here on the racetrack, I would say the Yamaha felt a bit sportier and slightly firmer than the Honda. That gave me a little more confidence when pushing harder. Would you agree with that, Martin?
Yes, absolutely. You can definitely feel that the Yamaha comes with a bit more damping from the factory. We also have a wide range of adjustment options here, and compared with the CBR, the basic suspension setup is clearly on the sportier side. Combined with a very well-designed chassis geometry that gives the bike a really pleasant handling character, it is very agile, turns in easily, and changes direction well. In some situations, it can almost feel a little nervous. You do notice that it does not have quite the same calm, almost stoic stability as the Honda, but in return, it rewards you with extremely light handling and a lot of flexibility when choosing your line. So if I enter a corner a little too quickly, I still have the option of tightening the line quite effectively. And thanks to the very manageable 3-cylinder engine with its broad and usable rev range, it is also a real pleasure on the racetrack, especially for less experienced riders who may not always keep the revs as high as you need to on the CBR600RR. The Yamaha gives you the option of being a little lazier through the corner and still getting strong drive on the exit. And that is a huge advantage for riders who only do the occasional track day.
We also talked about the ergonomics on the Honda, especially the foot pegs being too far forward. That was not something we noticed on the Yamaha. The whole setup feels much more natural. And with the wider handlebars, I would say it is simply better straight out of the box.
Yes, exactly, absolutely. The Yamaha simply offers a more versatile riding position. Even on the road, the Honda can become a little tiring because the higher your knees are positioned, the more effort it takes over longer distances. The seating ergonomics on the Yamaha are clearly more comfortable. The distance between the seat and the handlebars is also better judged. There is simply more room overall, and that helps especially when you move into a proper racing position and tuck down behind the fairing. You also get more space between your elbows and your knees. So overall, I think Yamaha has done a very good job with the ergonomics. One thing that is a little annoying, although you probably cannot see it clearly in the shot, is the long hero blobs underneath the foot pegs. They are simply far too long. On the racetrack, they touch down extremely early, so you would really want to shorten them. But you do have to be a little careful because there is usually a reason why manufacturers make them that long. Normally, another part of the motorcycle would touch the ground quite early. And by law, the first component to touch down should be something that can give way. The foot pegs can move because they are hinged, so manufacturers use these long feeler pins to make sure they touch the ground first. I suspect that if you remove too much, the side stand might be the next thing to make contact, and that would obviously be more critical. But for dedicated racetrack use, you can make the appropriate modifications.
And if necessary, the racetrack takes care of the modification for you. Those feeler pins just keep getting shorter. But let us talk briefly about the electronics. On the Yamaha R9, the display is already noticeably larger. I am a simple guy. I select sport mode or track mode right off and put all my faith in the electronics. You, on the other hand, are always using custom mode. Custom 2 was the key setting today. How did that work on the Yamaha?
On the Yamaha, it is actually quite straightforward. You have several different modes that you can configure exactly the way you want. And that works really well because you can then switch between them very quickly using the mode selector. You can clearly tell that the electronics package is one step more advanced than on the Honda, and naturally that also makes the operation more convenient. The quality of the electronic intervention is very good as well. There is really nothing to complain about. The systems do exactly what they are supposed to do. One thing I particularly like is that the Yamaha allows you to use what is often called Supermoto ABS. That means you can completely deactivate ABS intervention at the rear wheel. And that gives you significantly more braking performance because lifting the rear wheel no longer automatically causes the ABS to release brake pressure. Instead, the bike continues braking hard until there is actual slip at the front wheel. I really like that. Unfortunately, you cannot do that on the Honda.
We can forgive the Honda for that because when we look at the price tag, the Yamaha is already another significant step up. Here in Austria, we are talking about roughly 15,700 euros. So that is already around a 2,000 euro jump from the Honda. But you can spend another 2,000 euros and go for the orange package, the KTM 990 RCR. KTM has really made an impressive debut with this bike this year. We already have plenty of videos about it online. You did an incredible motovlog with it in Spain, an amazing racetrack video as well. Have I forgotten anything? And today, people also had the chance to ride it here at the track day. I would say the KTM is the absolute showstopper here. Apart from its striking looks, there is simply a huge amount of interest in this motorcycle, and for good reason. It is KTM's first proper supersport bike since the RC8, which you rode a lot yourself, Martin, and know very well. Now we have the 990 RCR. The 990 engine is already familiar. Just under 128 horsepower, a full electronics package, and now it is wrapped up in KTM's first proper supersport package in years. Martin, here at the Pannonia Ring, which is quite a compact circuit, how does the KTM perform?
I have to say really well. And it starts with the engine. Thanks to its two-cylinder layout and relatively large displacement, it is the biggest capacity bike in this comparison, and it delivers a serious amount of punch. Not only at lower revs either, even at the top end you can feel that it has a slight advantage over the other bikes here, and naturally that strong engine is a huge part of the KTM's character. At the same time, KTM has managed to build a very good chassis around it. The two-cylinder layout also allows the entire motorcycle to remain extremely narrow. That gives the rider a very pleasant feeling because the bike is incredibly slim between your knees and never feels particularly wide. That is another major advantage. But I think one of the KTM's greatest strengths is its rideability and above all the feedback it gives you. Out of these three motorcycles, the KTM is definitely the one that stands out for its exceptional stability. And ultimately that stability is exactly what you need when you want to push the front tire towards the limit and really explore how much grip is available. To do that, you need clear feedback from the front. And you simply do not get that feedback if the motorcycle becomes too nervous, especially when you hit bumps while entering a corner and the bike starts moving around underneath you. Even for an experienced rider, that can make it relatively difficult to feel exactly where the limit is. And this is where the KTM really shines. It gives you crystal clear feedback and remains incredibly composed. It is the most powerful bike in this comparison, and yet even under full acceleration, it remains by far the calmest and most stable of the three. For me, that is one of the most impressive qualities of this motorcycle.
Martin, where does that stability come from? Is it purely down to the chassis and suspension setup, or do the 1, 2, 3, 4 winglets I can count on this bike also play a part?
The winglets actually contribute relatively little to that stability. The main factors are the basic geometry of the motorcycle, the stiffness of the chassis, and the position of the center of gravity. Those are the things that really determine how stable a motorcycle feels when you are riding it. Trail, for example, is always a very important factor when it comes to influencing stability. And I think KTM has been able to draw on a lot of experience from Grand Prix racing. Moto2 in particular uses a very similar basic concept and layout. And you can really feel that KTM is absolutely on the right track with the fundamental design of the 990 RCR, combined with a very well set up suspension package that creates this level of precision. And with the Conti tires we are using, which also feel very neutral on turn-in, we have all the ingredients that even a fast rider needs to push the motorcycle right towards the limit with a lot of confidence.
But I think the real showpiece on this motorcycle, and I can already see you laughing because you know I am bringing it up again, is the display. A wide TFT screen, and very importantly, with touchscreen functionality. Martin, from your point of view, am I allowed to say how old you are?
Just over 30. I have to say this is the first time I have seen a motorcycle manufacturer choose this kind of format. Even apart from the functionality, I think the format itself is extremely well suited to a supersport motorcycle. What do you want to achieve at the front of a bike like this? You want a compact front end that does not become too tall or bulky, so you cannot really fit a huge vertically oriented display, but at the same time you still want plenty of screen space. There is more and more information to show now, from navigation to all the usual riding information and settings, so you need space. And on a motorcycle like this, going wider makes perfect sense. It uses the available space at the front extremely efficiently. Basically cinema format. Maybe one day we will even be able to watch films on it. We will see. But that is what I really like about it. It fills the space very well without looking too dominant. And the functionality speaks for itself. With the touchscreen, you do not have to navigate awkwardly through endless menu structures to reach a specific function. You can simply tap directly on what you want and adjust it immediately with plus or minus. And what I think is absolutely brilliant is the split screen function. You can literally move the divider across the screen with your finger. So for example, you can change how much space is used for navigation and how much is used for the normal motorcycle information. I think that is extremely well done.
Since we talked about ergonomics on the other two bikes, Martin, let us also cover the KTM. What I can see is a fairly steeply angled seat, foot pegs without those long feeler pins, and quite an open handlebar position.
Exactly, and those are already some of the most important points. The seat height is slightly higher than on the other two bikes. That already makes the ergonomics a little better for racetrack riding, especially for taller riders. Of course, if you have a particularly long upper body like you do, you notice these things even more. The advantage here is that the distance between the seat and the foot pegs is not quite as cramped. It feels a little more relaxed. The clip-ons are also mounted higher than on the Yamaha. So overall, the seating position is actually quite comfortable. That makes it very usable on the road as long as you are not particularly short. And it is also very comfortable on the racetrack. If you want something more aggressive, you can always lower the clip-ons a little. But I have to say, for track use, the ergonomics are extremely well judged. The only place I definitely would not want to sit is on the pillion seat. I normally do not comment much on design, but that really is, let us say, a very bold piece of styling. It is almost like KTM said, okay, we still need some kind of snack board, so they just mounted one on the back.
There's also a dinosaur with a horn that looks a bit like that. Anyway, the KTM is a really complete package, but it is also the most expensive bike in this comparison. Here in Austria, prices start at around 17,400 euros. So if I calculate quickly, that is just over 3,500 euros more than the cheapest bike here, the Honda. Martin, before we wrap things up, let us do one final direct comparison and sum everything up. Personally, my heart still belongs to Honda. It was my first big motorcycle, and my first proper meters on a racetrack were on a CBR600RR. And I can absolutely see that the concept still has a lot of appeal. A high-revving Inline-Four, the underseat exhaust still looks fantastic. But I also have to admit that a motorcycle like the Yamaha R9 with more flexibility from the engine is simply more accessible. And to be honest, the Yamaha was actually the bike I had the most fun on today. With the KTM, you said you do not care because you're constantly shifting gears anyway. But personally, I am happy if I do not have to shift quite so much on the racetrack. I already have enough other things to concentrate on. And compared with the others, I think the KTM is geared quite short. The Yamaha R9 feels like a really nice middle ground. You still get some of that old school character where you can rev the engine out, but at the same time, you have proper punch from lower down, and the ergonomics and handling are very approachable. The KTM is without question an amazing motorcycle, but I think I am simply not worthy of it.
I also have to say that the Honda's biggest disadvantage is simply its smaller displacement. It is not entirely a fair comparison. If the Honda had a similar engine capacity to the other two bikes, the result could look very different. You have to say that in fairness. It is a classic Supersport bike, exactly the way we used to know them. Fans of that traditional concept will still have a huge amount of fun on it. There is no question about that. But the two bikes on the outside already have an advantage simply because their engines are much more flexible. For me though, when it comes to outright performance and lap times, the clear winner is the KTM. It gives me the precision I need or really want from a motorcycle when I am trying to approach the limit very accurately. And when you combine that precision with what is also the strongest engine in this direct comparison, then for me it simply has the edge. So yes, I have to say it, I would choose orange.
So everyone has their own favorite, and of course we do not want to talk the Honda down. We are still happy every time we see one. But if you occasionally ride track days, our recommendation is to do what we did. We fitted the Continental SportAttack 5. As we already mentioned, Martin explains all the details about that tire on the Super Duke in another video. Martin, once again, thank you for your expertise. It is always a pleasure making a video with you. And if you enjoyed the video as well, please leave us a thumbs up. And of course, also for the two cameramen behind the cameras, Matteo and Jakob have been sweating properly today in around 30 degrees. Apart from that, thank you very much for watching. Subscribe to the channel and we will see you in the next video. See you soon. Bye and take care.